Hey everyone, in this video we are going to look at creating a Microsoft Access database from scratch. This video is really meant for beginners, but we'll probably move at a fairly quick pace. So we're not going to go really in depth, but we're going to cover the three main objects that make up a database. There's really like five or six, but pretty much all database will have at least three. And those are tables, queries, and forms. So quick overview, and then we'll get into it. Tables, that is where you store the data in the database. These are the repositories of information. So the table stores the data. Queries let you search for data from those tables. So maybe you want to see records created by a certain person or records, a transaction of a certain dollar amount. You can use a query to find those. Queries can also be used to update records en masse. So an example of that is maybe you want to find all mailing addresses that include the word street and change it to the abbreviation ST. Why? Because the US mail uses ST and they don't spell out the word street. So you run a query to find and replace wherever street is written and replace it with just ST. And that's just one example. So queries let you search for data and under certain circumstances, update the data. And forms allow you to create a friendly user interface. And there's really two aspects to this. One is security, because for the most part, you really don't want your end users to have direct access to the tables, for example. They could see employees' compensation, they could see employees' social security number, there could be other security issues there. So you really don't want the end users being able to randomly browse through this information. So by creating a form, you control very tightly what they can do, how they can interact with that table. Maybe you just need them to do data entry and you don't want them to be able to view the table. So you want them to just do data entry. Well, you can create a form and it allows for data entry without actually seeing the table. And the other reason why you'd create a form is because it makes it much more user friendly. Because queries, for instance, don't look like anything else that I've ever seen in any kind of application. They're a unique kind of construct. So you hide away the query and that you can use the form to put in the criteria for the query. Because obviously, if you're searching for something, there's some criteria. Again, are you looking for a dollar amount? Are you looking for whoever created the record? So you can use a form that then transmit that information to the query behind the scenes, and then the query runs and gives you the results. So you're really seeing the results the query comes up with rather than the query itself. You're not really seeing the structure. So the form allows you to create this user interface between the user and these database objects, again, for security and for usability. Okay, so let's actually start creating some of these things. So let's go up to the Create tab, and we're going to click on Table. And what we're going to do is most database objects have multiple ways of viewing them. Right now, we're in datasheet view. So this is how you'd view it if you're looking at the actual data. You're browsing the table like a spreadsheet. So datasheet, spreadsheet, synonymous in this case. Okay, but we don't want to see the datasheet view. We're not looking to do data entry. We want to get into the design view. So this is where you change the structure. So you always want to keep that in mind. Are you looking about adding data to the table, which does not change the structure, or are you actually looking to change the structure itself? Are you looking to add fields, format fields, rename fields, that kind of thing? So we want to go to design view. It wants a name. Let's call this all underscore EE underscore table. So all employee table. So I'm going to start off primary key. Please don't read too much into that. Primary keys are important. I just don't want to get into the various restrictions right now, but you do need primary keys, particularly if you're looking for unique records and things like that. I'm just going to shut it off. I'll make a separate video about the use of primary keys. Okay, so field name and data type. So this is the basic structure of the table. You say what the field is, and then you say what type of data is in that field. So let's do EE underscore first underscore name. Data type will be short text. So three quick things. Field name, don't use spaces. The short version is because if you create a module, which is another type of database object, it has coding in it, such as Visual Basic or SQL. Well, if you have spaces, it confuses the code and you have to add additional identifiers to let the code know what the name of the field is. So if you put in spaces, it confuses that coding. So to simplify matters, just use underscores. You'll get used to seeing underscores. Someone is still going to ask me why I use spaces. Happens every time. Okay, so don't use spaces because it messes up the coding in modules. Second, don't use, for the most part, a single word, particularly if that word is common. So like name, uh, date, things like that. Those are functional words. The word date is actually a built-in function to Microsoft Access. So if you call your field date, it could possibly confuse it. Again, once you start getting into the coding, you probably could have a table called date without an issue, but if you start running SQL against it or start running some VB, some Visual Basic script, then you're probably going to have issues. So avoid that issue. Try to be descriptive. Don't use a single word again, such as name or format, uh, uh, date, things like that. Try to add at least an extra word to make it more descriptive. And the third thing to mention, another reason to add extra words is because both in the context of the database and outside of the context of the database, like where I've worked in the past, spreadsheets get passed around all the time, and if the fields aren't named in a descriptive enough manner, people will have no idea what it is. If you just call this first name of the employee, first name of the client, first name of a contact, who is this? Okay, so by taking the step of adding EE, you are adding additional information. It's the employee first name. So no spaces because it messes up coding. Don't use single words such as date or name or format because it could also mess up coding, and make it descriptive adequately so if this information is taken out of the database, someone will know what it's for. Okay, second thing. So once you have a field here, okay, if you come down to the bottom section, field properties, you can actually set some parameters here. So field size, 255. Why would you change field size? Because databases are meant to be fault tolerant and they're meant to be flexible. Okay, they shouldn't just randomly crash. Okay, so what happens is if you have a field and the field size is 255. If you put in a value that's only 10 characters long, Microsoft Access has still reserved the remaining 245 characters worth of space. So what happens is if you have a table with a lot of columns and a lot of rows, and you have a field size of 255, you're going to start bloating up that database. You're going to see bloat and you're not going to know where it's come from because every single field that says field size 255, it's holding that much memory in case you have to go back and modify that record, that field within that record. Okay, because this is a per field per record um, change. So a parameter, I should say. So for a first name, you might be able to do this, say just 50 characters in size. Last name, maybe you might want to go a little bit higher. 50 is probably in the high end, depends on country, culture, that kind of thing. But be mindful of that you don't want this some ridiculous size that you don't use because you're going to create bloat. You're going to make your database hold on to all this extra space it doesn't need. So whatever, I'm going to just put it at 75. It's not going to be a big database anyways. And you can do other things such as default value. So maybe there's a value that you want to capture. It has a predictable value 100% of the time, such as today's date. And therefore you don't want the data entry people to have to waste their time or make a mistake entering a value that again is 100% predictable, such as today's date. Okay, so you could put in a default value there. And there's a few others, but I'm not going to go through those now. Again, trying to not do too deep of a dive, but I don't want to glaze over things too quickly. I want to give hopefully a decent amount of information. So EE underscore last underscore name. Again, we're going to choose short text, and there's also other choices here, such as number, large number. So quick thing about number. The only time you really want to choose number or large number is if you're going to make calculations with that number. So if something is all numbers, but you're not going to use it to calculate, then you should store it as a text. So like say maybe you have some kind of client identifier and it's all numbers, you wouldn't use number, you would use text because you're not going to do a calculation. Likewise, social security number, um, date. Well, there's a separate one for date anyways. Um, but just because it's all numbers doesn't mean you'd use numbers. That basically, if you're going to do a calculation, then use number or large number. If you're not going to do a calculation, if it's not meant to be calculated, added, divide, multiplication, whatever, then use text. So phone number, social security number, things like that. EE, let's see, status, like so active, inactive, terminated, that kind of thing. So again, short text, we could do EE underscore hire underscore date. For this, you could choose date time, EE underscore term underscore date. Again, date time. Now, I do want to mention, see down here how it says required? You can make a field required. Be very careful about that because if someone isn't terminated, they're not going to have a term date. So if you make it a required field, you now have a problem because you have a field that's required, but no valid information for that field. So be very careful about when you make fields required. So first name, last name, status, hire date, and let's see, EE. Street underscore Addy. Probably not in this video, but maybe in a later video, I will do what I described about doing a find and replace with um, address. That's a little bit more complicated, but I just want to put that there in case we get to it. So, all right, so we've made changes. So if I try to close this, it'll want me to save it. So if I click on the little X here, do you want to save? Yes, I do. And then we double click to open up our field, our table. So you will always be prompted to save a structural change. So for instance, if I change this row width just by pointing at the separator and I left click, if I try to close this, it's going to say, do you want to save your changes? Because I made a structural change, right? If I enter data, so employee first name Jill, last name Valentine, and I close this, no prompt. Why? Because data is automatically saved as soon as you type it in. The only exception is if, say, I type, now in the last one I closed out, but say I say, oh, they're not active, and I hit escape, the data has not been saved. Otherwise, it has been saved. So you'll never be prompted to save the data. You'll be prompted to save the structural changes, but the data is entered as soon as you type it in. Okay, so we'll put in active, hire date. We'll say today. There's no termination date. And street address, we'll say 100. And we'll just say King Street. And I'll spell it straight again, just in case we do that update query that I mentioned. Now, that is a completely terrible way to actually do data entry. You do not want people using your table like a spreadsheet because it's incredibly inefficient. And also, there's certain validation rules you might want to put in place, and maybe there's certain things you want to do to the data before it gets saved to the table. So that's another thing that forms let you do, is it lets you, maybe you want to make all the letters capital. I think it's Oracle databases. I don't know if they still do, but I think at one time they only accepted all capital letters. So maybe you do something like that. Maybe you want to make it all caps, or maybe you want to do this where you only want the first letter capital. Some people might not have noticed they put some caps in. So by using a form, in addition to the security that we mentioned, in addition to make it user friendly, you can also impose data controls. Okay. So let's close this table. It wants to save not because of the data entry, but because I changed the width of that field. And we're now going to create a form, one of the three types of database objects I said we were going to review in this video. So again, we go up to create. This time we go to blank form. And again, view, you have the ability to have the form view, or you can go to design view. We're not going to talk about layout view. So actually, I think we're actually technically in layout view, but not really seeing any difference at this point. So generally speaking, when you're using a form, functionally, it's going to be in form view. That is what your end user is going to use. Just like the table, design view is when you're trying to change the structure. So among the other things that we're going to do, we're going to shut off the selectors here, the record selectors, the navigation bar. Again, you want to lock down your database. You don't want your employees just being able to view however they want to. You want to tightly control what the end users can do with that database. Now that might sound weird because the database objects are going to be listed here. We'll eventually show you how to shut that off. There's a way to shut off the panel over here. You can shut off the ribbon. That's what this is called up here. We'll show you how to do that in another video. Okay, so this brings us to format. So if we click on design, okay, you can do a couple things. See this dot here? That's telling you that the form as a whole is selected. If you click here, it disappears because now you've got this selected. You're really selecting the body now, or if there's a heading, you're selecting the heading. So if you select the form as a whole, you can make changes to the form. We want this form to be able to interact with this table. And it could interact in a couple ways. One, it could read from the table, like maybe you want them to have a drop down box that has certain selections and you want those selections to come from a table, well, in that case, you want the form to be pulling from a table. Okay. Maybe it's a list of products and you want a drop down box to have those products. Okay. So that way, when you update the table, the drop down box automatically updates because it's pulling from the table. So forms under some circumstances will read from a table. In our case, we want the form to write to the table because this is going to be our new employee entry form. So rather than entering the data like a spreadsheet, we're going to use a form. Okay, so with the form selected with the dot up here, if you come over to property sheet and we're on the design tab, you have several categories. We're going to do a couple things. We're going to go to format and we're going to shut off those navigation buttons that we mentioned. So record selectors, we're going to change that to no. Navigation button, I'm going to change that to no. And if we go to data, data entry defaults to no. We're going to do yes. We want to do data entry. And among other things, that will automatically have the form open to a new record rather than opening to whatever the first or the most recent, whatever it's set to do. So data entry, yes. And I think that's it for the moment for that kind of formatting. Now, up here in the control section, again, design tab, control section, we're going to add a label. A label has no functional benefit, but it communicates to the end user. So big difference between text box, which can be linked to a field, and a label, which is just that. It's just string. So just going to click on that, left click, drag, and now we have a label. If we go to format, we can do things such as typical kind of bold, underline, and stuff. It's grayed out because there's no text here. So we'll call this add new employee. Okay. Now that it's selected, we can make some changes. So let's make that say like a 20 font, make it bold, make it underline. Now you can modify the size of this. So if you point at one of the control corners or control dots, so I'll shrink that in. Doesn't necessarily make a difference other than the formatting within it. And if you point at an edge but not one of the dots, then you can move it around. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. You got like 1 3/4, 1 3/4 ish. You can kind of shrink this in if you want. You just point at the edge and move it. And okay, so now what we're going to do, we're actually going to make one more change that I could have a few seconds ago. We're going to click on the form again, and we're going to go to data. And in addition to setting data entry to yes, we're going to link this form to this table. So this table will be a data source for this form. So record source, and again, record row, synonymous. So you think of a row of a spreadsheet, it's a record in a table. There's only one table, so it's the all EE table. So now there is interactivity between the table and the form. In this case, we want the data to be one way. We want the form to write to the table, not read from it. Like I said, example of reading from it would be a drop-down box that shows you the most current product offerings or something like that. In this case, it's the opposite. This is writing to the table. So we go back to design, and now we go to add existing fields. Here's all the fields from this table. They were not here until we set the form to have the table as the record source. So this is just a shift left click to grab them all, drag and drop them here. Now, if you grab the kind of big dot in the left corner, that will move the label separately from the corresponding field. Okay. If you grab like an edge, it'll move them both at the same time. Just a quick advisory, you are not going to see any kind of high-tech formatting. I am no good at layout. I have no sense of aesthetics. So that's just something you're going to have to do on your own. I just selected the items, and then you can use the arrows on the keyboard if you want. Now, I mentioned that you don't want spaces in field names, okay? This is just the label. So this you can change all you want. So you can get rid of the underscores and put in spaces. Again, it's a label. It has no functional purpose other than to communicate to the end user. So I could actually change this to employee first name and everything is just fine. It does not break the linkage between this and this because again, this is just a label. Technically, you could delete all the labels and create brand new labels. Functionally, no difference. And again, just changing this name does not change this name. You can see the underscores are still there. The only thing to be careful about is that depending on how you have the layout, you're going to want to make sure that this doesn't deviate too much from this, if nothing else, so you, the database manager, doesn't get confused when you're designing this. It's like, oh, what's this field? What's this a label for? And also, I want to point out one more thing. Oops, what did I do? Term date. All right. This does not actually, so all objects have a name. So if I click on this, I mentioned that you can select the properties. So like if you have the dot up here, selecting the properties of the form as a whole, well, you can look at the properties of any given control. Okay, so if I click on this label and I come up to property sheets, this is now the property sheets of the control of the label. Okay, as you can see, data, there's no data, so it's not going to show you that. But if I go to format, there is some formatting that I can do. And see how it says label 0? So even though this says, even though this says add new employee, that's not the name of the object. That's not the name of the control. The control is actually label 0. So if you get into coding, you're going to want, if we get into like some Visual Basic later on and we have it modify the form, if we're trying to do something with that label, we're not looking for add new employee label. We're looking for a label 0. So that you can also actually rename. Like if you go to the all tab and it says name, if you change it here, you could change it to say add new label, add new EE label, whatever you want. So just be mindful. There's a difference between what something displays and its actual name. So if all has gone into plan, this should now be used for data entry. The only thing that this is missing is a button because you're going to really want to add a button that says like closes the form. So if we take the button, so that's this icon here, just close out a button. It just gives you an advisory. You say open. And what this does is this gives you a wizard. You can do this manually if you want, or you can do it automatically through the wizard. Since this is a form operation, we're just going to do form operators and then close forms. Next. Do you want text on it? Do you want a picture? We'll put, text close form. Next, uh, it's showing you what it's going to look like over there. And again, what a label or a caption says is not the same thing as the name of the object. So this would be command 7. You could call this maybe close form button. So if we do any kind of coding later, that is the object that we'd look for. And see, it says close form. If we click on it, you can see over here, close form button, just like I said, the All tab when you look into the properties of an object. Okay. So let's see if I have not made any mistakes. So we save this. It wants a name. We'll call this add underscore EE underscore, and we'll actually type out form. I've seen sometimes they just type out FRM, TBL for table. I'm just going to type out form. And then we click on view. So again, this is what your end users will see. They won't see, ugh, they'll see this. And then, like I said, you can add controls. So you can add validation, I should say, not controls. You can add validation rules. So you can maybe make things all cap or all lowercase, or checking for length or checking for special characters. Maybe your database has trouble with special characters, so it will remove special characters, that kind of thing. So let's do Albert Wesker and termed and hire date. It brings up a little calendar. We can choose whenever. Term date can't be soon enough. And street address, whatever, 200 King Road. Hers was street, his will be road. Now, just so you know, this has already been added. So this has already been added to the table even before clicking on close form. So I click on close form, I come to the table, and there we go. It has been added. So I'm hoping that really demonstrates that your end user will see this. They're not seeing the table. They don't need to see the underlying objects. One other thing I want to mention, if you come back and add other fields, you might find strange behavior when you're tabbing. That's the order of the focus, and let's see if I can find that for you. I might put it in the description, but you have the ability to say what order you tab from. So there's a tab order. Tab index 0. Yes, the tab index, sorry. So focus just refers to the current one that's selected. So you'll see that encoding saying when something has the focus. This has the focus because it's selected, but it's the tab index. So 2, 3, 4. So if I was to like swap these positions, it would actually tab out of order. So I just wanted to mention that. But if you start adding things, you're going to have to change the tab index. Okay, so I think that's it for add new employee. So let's close that. Let's close the table. And we're moving kind of quick, but I said I wanted to cover the 3 basic objects that make databases. Again, there's other objects such as modules, which we could cover in another video. There's reports, like I said, your mileage may vary, but I don't like reports. I find it's better just to export the data and then slice and dice it into Excel or into whatever you want to use. So we're going to create a query. So create query design. You can either select it from here or you can just drag and drop the table from here, either way. The star, what the star does is if I use the star, if I add any more fields to this table, it will automatically add those fields to this query, which isn't necessarily the behavior you want, because if someone else is using the results of this query downstream of this query, obviously, then it might break what they're doing. You might add a field and then their system can't handle the field and then the data import fails. Okay. So I'm just going to select, so just shift click and then drag and drop. Oops. That extra column would delete itself, but you could just delete it like that. Okay, so the name of the fields, as you can see, there's criteria, so you could put criteria in here. So maybe you want to search for employees who are terminated. So we would do, I believe termed is what I used. It puts into quotes because this is a text field. Run, and sure enough, it brought up Albert Wesker. Now what you can do is you can create a form that runs this query. So I think I'll show you that in the next video because I think this video's run on quite a bit already. So so rather than having a form that's hard coded for just one thing, because right now if I save this, it's saving it as termed, and then you would have to come into this query and then manually change it. And again, that's not the behavior you want. You don't want your end users to have to come and muck around with this. This looks, this is very unfamiliar territory for most people. I can't think of any other kind of construct in an application that looks like this. So, um, what you can do is you can use a form that puts a value into here. So the form would have a drop-down box that says active and termed, and now you can use the same query to do active or termed. And that's just one thing. Maybe you're looking for a certain hire date, or maybe you're looking for a certain city. Maybe there's certain regulations in certain cities. And so what you can do is you can create a form that gives you all these different choices, and those choices put a value into this field. So I think I'll save that for the next video because that's really about it for the basics. So if we save this, we'll just call this EE underscore. Does the word query give it an issue? No, it's fine with query. Again, you have to be very careful about what you're naming. And even that's not a great name because it's just EE query. Because right now it's technically a termed query, but I plan on, like I said, adding a form that will let you turn this into a multiple type of query, that it won't be just termed, it will be for other purposes as well. So I think that's it for this first video. I already have a complete series about database management, but it's really old. The audio is not good. So I normally don't ask this, but please, if you like this, please leave a like and please subscribe because the problem is all of my channel all the statistics are associated with that old video, and that video will keep being promoted by YouTube unless there's activity on this video. So I normally don't ask for that, but if there's more activity on this video, then I can eventually just delete that old video, but I can't delete it right now because that's still the video that YouTube recommends, and it's not going to automatically recommend this one unless there's activity on this. Also, please leave a comment for anything that you want to see. I do my best to try to do demonstrations of what people ask for. And as I mentioned, I already have a ton of database videos. This is kind of me starting from scratch with a new series. And if it does well, I'll keep going. This is more of a kind of a cram session. The other ones go into more detail. Um, Again, like how to create a report. I go through like every type of query, how to use inner outer joins, things like that. So again, I hope you found this useful. If you're new to Microsoft Access, whether you're a student or office worker or manager, whatever you're doing, like I said, please leave a comment if there's something you want to see, and I will do my very best to meet those requests, as long as they're not like completely outlandish. All right, so please enjoy the day, and I hope this was useful to you.